Hey everybody! Today I want to talk about deeps versus mediums and what's best for your hive. So, one of the big questions I had to answer when I started beekeeping was, am I going to use deep boxes for my brood chambers, or am I going to use mediums all the way across? If you're unfamiliar with what a brood chamber is, a brood chamber in a traditional Langstroth beehive is the part of the hive where the queen will lay her eggs and the bees will raise baby bees. Usually it's the bottom part of the hive on a vertical hive. So usually the bottom few boxes in a large hive will be what's considered the brood chamber. In times past, and even now in most commercial operations, the popular configuration for a Langstroth beehive is to have one or two deep brood chamber boxes on the bottom of the hive, then often a queen excluder, and above that they will put what's called supers, and usually a super is a medium box. Now, any box could be a brood chamber or a super depending on where it is in the hive and what the bees are using it for. They only call the boxes on top supers because they're above the brood chamber, so they supersede it, I suppose. Something, they're above it. So those terms can be a little confusing when you first start beekeeping. I'm like, what's a super? Is it like better than other boxes? Like, why wouldn't I want supers for everything? They sound like they're the best, you know? It's a little odd, but once you understand kind of the history and what they do in the hive, it makes a little more sense. So your brood chamber, the bees will use whatever equipment you put them in to build comb on and raise their baby bees. They don't require deep frames or medium frames or the shallow frames. They will use whatever they're given, and in nature they adapt to the spaces they're able to find to build their hives. And you see this if you ever watch videos where people do cutouts, or if you've ever done a cutout yourself, you'll find bees in all kinds of weird spaces, and they just adapt their comb, height to the space. So they're able to work with what we give them. So what are the advantages and disadvantages, and why should you care? Why should you care? Well, there are some reasons that I think mediums is a better way to go, especially for the hobbyist beekeeper. And I'll tell you why I went with all mediums first. Now, keep in mind, whatever you decide to do is fine. It's beekeeping, it's a hobby. The most important thing is that you do it. Go buy some equipment, get a bee suit, find some bees, a nuke or a package or something, and start beekeeping. That's the most important thing. Whether you do deeps or mediums or whatever, everyone's going to have an opinion about what you should or shouldn't do. And I just want a disclaimer right now, I'm not an expert, okay? I don't know everything there is to know about bees and boxes and everything. I'm a guy who's passionate about bees, who wants to encourage other people to start beekeeping. That's the main thing I think I want to do with my videos and with this YouTube channel, is for those people who are on the fence, who are researching bees, who are thinking about starting beekeeping and are nervous because maybe they live in an urban or suburban neighborhood and they're worried they can't do it. I want to try to help those people take that first step of actually getting their first hive, because it's totally worth it. So whether you do mediums, deeps, or whatever, at the end of the day, it's a personal choice, and it's less important than the fact that you keep bees. So let's just throw that out there. The other thing is that everyone's going to give you an opinion, like I said, and at the end of the day, you got to make a decision for yourself and what you want to do, and it's not life or death whether you go with deeps or mediums. So let me just disclaimer that right now. However, I think there are some advantages to going all medium, especially for the hobbyists, and I want to get into those right now. So this is a medium box. Let me pull this over. This box is 6 5/8 from top to bottom. So this dimension here, 6 5/8. This is what would be called, I believe, an Illinois medium or a Western. I think there are some other mediums that aren't 6 5/8 deep. I would steer away from those because they're hard to find frames for. The 6 5/8 is the most common medium depth, and these are the easiest to find frames from all suppliers. The advantage to having mediums as your brood chamber and your honey supers is that you can take any frame from any box, from any hive, for any reason, and put it into any other hive at any time, because they're all the same depth and length, and they fit in every box. So if you have an apiary of 4 or 5 hives like I have right now in my backyard, and you have a weak hive that needs some more nurse bees because you made a split and now the flow's done and they're not building up and they're struggling, you can throw some nurse bees and some honey in there from another hive. Just make sure your queen's not on that frame and put it in your split. You know, for anything you want to do within your apiary, all your gear is interchangeable within your hives, and it gives you a huge advantage, because if you were to have deep boxes, which are 3 inches deeper, deep boxes are 9 5/8 deep, and the frames are also 3 inches longer. So these are 6 1/4, and the deeps are 9 1/4. You can't just take a deep frame and put it in a medium box. Now you can take a medium frame and put it in a deep box, but the bees will draw out comb down within 3/8 of an inch of the top of the next frame down, and they'll put that on the bottom of this medium frame in the deep box, so they'll fill out that space, and eventually you have to cut it off. It's not the end of the world, it's just another thing to have to deal with. But you can't put it deep in a medium box, not unless you leave a space beneath it. And then if you have a gap underneath it where there's no frame in the box below it, they can do all kinds of wild stuff, and they're cross comb and all kinds of stuff, and that can be a real mess. So that's a huge advantage. To me, that's the biggest advantage of doing all medium. Another advantage is that it's lighter when you're dealing with brood chambers and we're moving a lot of boxes in the spring. It's easier on your back. You have to move more boxes, but they're lighter. Even the brood chambers are lighter. Now, a couple of negatives. The first negative is, since these don't make the same amount of space as a deep box, you need more of them for the bees to have what you would call a full-size brood chamber. So traditionally, there's 2 main ways that people manage deep brood chambers, and that's a single deep with a queen excluder and then honey supers above it, which is, you have to be really, really skilled and really on top of it to run a single deep brood chamber, because the bees can swarm really quickly in that configuration, since a queen can quickly run out of room to lay eggs. When that happens, they're going to start making queen cells. Another really common configuration is 2 deeps for a brood chamber, which is much easier to manage. Then a queen excluder will go on top of the second box, and then everything above that would be these mediums, and then these would all be filled with honey, and your deeps would have the brood, and that'd be the end of that story. Now, the volume of space that 2 deeps occupy is almost identical to the same volume of space that 3 mediums occupy. So, simple math, each box has 10 frames. 2 deep boxes is 20 frames. 3 medium boxes is 30 frames. And sometimes I end up with 4 mediums for my brood chambers, because they'll do some funky stuff with the bottom box and it's all full of resources. I have to pull it, and anyway, it can get a little funky on that end. Your spring hive management with your medium boxes, you can have a lot of frames to inspect during spring inspections when you might be having problems with swarming. Your hive's building up really quickly, you start finding queen cells, and now, you got to go through 30 frames, not just 20, to find your queen cells and to find your queen. So it can be harder to find the queen in medium boxes too, because you have extra frames to try to find the queen on. Now there's some workarounds to that. It's not the end of the world, but that is a disadvantage. It's a lot less work to go through 20 deep frames than 30 medium frames. Another disadvantage is that because you need extra boxes for your brood chamber, it costs a little bit more per hive. You're going to spend $70 more per hive about to do mediums, because you're going to need that extra medium for your brood chamber versus the 2 deeps. But over the course of a lifetime of gear, if you buy good gear, you build it well, if you're putting it together yourself, you buy quality components, it's going to last quite a while. So that's not too big of a disadvantage, but you do have to consider that. It's going to be a little bit more money. For the hobbyist, I don't think it's the biggest deal. As a commercial beekeeper, I don't think I would do mediums, all mediums. I don't think it'd be practical as a commercial beekeeper with hundreds of hives to do all mediums. If you're queen rearing, if you're a hobbyist, I think there's a lot of advantages to mediums. And here's a bonus that I'm just learning is an advantage to all mediums, that it kind of comes off of one of the negatives. This is the sort of negative that's a positive. While it's true that you have more frames to inspect because you have more frames in your brood chamber, you can make more splits. And a nucleus colony, a medium nuke, costs almost the same as a deep nuke, if not more sometimes. And you can make more of them from the same volume of bees because you have more frames available. So I can make a 6-frame nuke. I can make 3 of those from one hive in a good year, in a good spring. Whereas if it was a deep, you might make 1 or 2 nukes for each hive. So if you want to sell nukes, that can be a big advantage, and that can pay for your gear like that. So that can make up for the extra cost of your medium boxes. Another advantage, if you want to breed queens, you have more frames. You can find eggs on different frames. You have a lot more modularity there. You have a lot more choices, so you can breed queens. I would not necessarily more successfully, but you can breed more queens using medium gear than you can with the same volume of deep gear. So what are the advantages to deeps? Well, we kind of discussed it already, and one of them is cost. It's going to cost less per hive because you have at least 1 fewer boxes to use in each hive because you're using deeps. The other advantage is it's easier to inspect in the spring. That's a huge advantage. What are the disadvantages of deeps? They're kind of the trade-off, the opposite side of the coin from mediums. They don't have the interchangeability that going with all mediums do. So if you have all mediums, you can put a frame wherever from whatever hive in whatever box for whatever reason. In a deep, that's not the case. You can't put those deep frames in your medium boxes, not unless you cut them down or leave a space beneath them. So that can be a hindrance, especially for the hobbyist. If you have tons of hives and you have lots of deep and medium gear, it's not as big of a deal. But for a hobbyist, it can be a lot more challenging because you don't have as many options as the the commercial beekeeper with tons of hives. So I think for a hobbyist, it's a good way to go. Another negative to deeps is that they are heavier. Even the brood chamber boxes are quite a bit heavier. Now, a medium box full of honey weighs about 50 or 60 pounds. And a deep box full of honey weighs 80 or 90 pounds. That's a big difference. And I mean, I don't know a whole lot of people who use deeps for honey supers. There are some commercial operations that do it, and maybe even some hobbyists, and it's an option. But I don't want to lift an 80-pound box of honey. I mean, medium is annoying enough to have to lift. So, to me, it's worth it for the lower weight. But, again, doing mixed gear works for a lot of people. So, the main takeaway here shouldn't be, oh, all mediums is superior to deeps, and if you use deeps, you're wrong, or you should only use mediums, or anything like that. The takeaway is, whatever you do, whether you go with deeps for your brood chambers or you go with mediums, start beekeeping. Get a hive, get a suit, find a mentor, find a bee club, find someone to buy bees from in your area if you can. That's the best way to get started, and start beekeeping. I hope this has been helpful to you. My name's Michael. Please do like and subscribe.